The gospel today comes from Luke, the 12th chapter. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.'" This is the gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
But today, I want to take us even a little bit deeper into this parable from Luke's gospel about what is titled "The Rich Fool." Sort of a harsh title, and it's harsh language that God uses for this man. But I think it's a parable that is really important for us to dig into and to think about. And this is where I want to start with the parable with all of us, is thinking about the invisible characters. The invisible characters that exist in and around this parable that are not explicitly named. Because in this story, there's really just two characters in the parable, not including the younger brother that asked for his inheritance. It's only the property owner, the rich man, and God that are speaking in this parable. But there is so many invisible characters that if we don't think about and pay attention to, we will miss some pieces of this story. So think about the crux of the story. There is a rich man who has crops that he tends to, and he has such an abundant harvest from the land that he is pondering to himself, what do I do with this abundance? And he decides to build a bigger barn, pile it in, and then say to himself, I'm going to have what I need to relax, to enjoy, and to be merry for the rest of my life. So think with me. Who are the invisible characters that we have to think about in this story? Who are the characters that may not be known or named? Take a risk. Anybody want to guess what an invisible character may be that is not named in this story? Say that again. Workers. Right? Do you all think that this man likely tended to his crops in his field alone? No, not a chance. And so there's workers in the midst of this community that would have been asked to participate in harvesting this rich abundance. But are the workers named at all in this man's consciousness or his dialogue with himself? No. Who else? What's another character you might think about that goes unnamed in this story? People in need. Absolutely, right? There is a community of people that this man resides within, a community of people that probably need measures of the food that he has harvested, but yet this food is sitting in his own barns going for his own benefit. And so there are people all around that could have benefited from that harvest. People in need, the community. What else? What other characters are invisible that we have not yet named? Family. It's highly likely that this man has family. As we think about why it is Jesus tells this parable, Jesus is responding to a brother who's asking for his inheritance. A brother who likely is giving off the air of greed, of not caring about his family, only caring about his measure of his estate. And so likely Jesus is telling this parable, recognizing that this man has no consciousness about his family at all, in order to send even a little bit more of a message to this brother asking for the share of his estate. Absolutely. So that's another unnamed character. Family. What else? There's two more that I can think about. All right, I'll bring you in on my thinking on this. And these are far less tangible. The economy. You ever thought about the economy in this story? Because what happens when you have a man with an abundance of crops and he decides to hoard those crops for himself in the midst of a community where people are in need and need these resources? What happens to the supply-demand equation? Less supply, higher prices. Does this sound familiar to where we are collectively? Right? And so the economy is a part of this story. This man is deciding to hoard for himself, which would negatively impact the access of these resources for others. And then there's one final character in the story, the earth itself, the land. Could have this man received any of the abundance of his crops without the earth itself providing? No. So these are all characters in this story that go unnamed, that are fully invisible, and that this rich man pays no attention to in his inner dialogue. And that's really the crux of this story. This story is not about money, even though I talk about money with the kids. This story is about idolatry. The Colossians text names it, right? Greed, and then in parentheses, which is idolatry. In this case, this man has made himself an idol. He is focused on me, myself, and I. Not on any awareness of anything happening in the world or the community around him. And in addition to that, he has idolized security, pleasure, the things that he may want for himself over and above the needs of what exists in the community around him. And that perhaps is the crux of this message for us as people. It's not to judge us or shame us for being greedy human beings. It's to help warn us against idolatry, against trusting in things that actually cannot provide what we need in life. Because what we need, what we are called to place our ultimate trust in, is not our wealth, not our possessions, not our comfort, not our security, but simply in God. And the ways of life that God initiated for us in the very beginning. A life meant to be lived in harmony with all of the creation, all of the earth, all living creatures, all human beings. To participate as good stewards, faithfully, not only receiving what God provides for us, but sharing and participating in the nurturing of life for all things. And so what are we as human beings and human communities to do to help us not become idolatrous of our wealth or of our own ego or our own needs for security or pleasure? Well, I think that there's three practices that we in the life of the church are called to practice. Three things that this man likely could have benefited from himself. The first is gratitude. Because what gratitude does when we practice being thankful for the things and the people that help us and provide for us in our lives is it helps draw us out of ourselves. It helps us direct our attention on other things around us and to give thanks and to open our hearts to those people. Imagine the simple act of this man acknowledging, what if I could provide for my workers some equal share of the abundance of the crops that I have because I am so grateful for the work and the labor that they have given. Is that a radical shift for this man? Likely. And it's in that gratitude is not only the act of saying thank you or having a grateful heart. Gratitude is an act of extending ourselves to another person or to another thing. Think about the earth as another one of these characters in this story. To be able to have a full heart of gratitude for the land means that we would be able to say that we are not going to live unsustainable lives that are continuing to drain life from the earth, but instead we are going to ensure that we are living sustainably in ways that ensure the earth can heal and be whole and continue to produce and provide for us as people. That act of gratitude reframes how we relate to all measures of life. But the second discipline, in addition to gratitude, then, is what we talked about with the kids. It's generosity. It's actually the act of sharing the resources that we have with other people to ensure that all people have what they need in life. And as God calls this man in this parable to give generously to God, we know that giving to God does not just mean giving to the offering plate here at church. It means sharing everything of who we are, our time, our abilities, the resources that we have, the gifts and skills that God has blessed us with, in addition to our money and our resources, so that our world can be enhanced, that we don't hoard those things for ourselves, but others can be blessed through them. And that's the great reciprocity of generosity, is as much as that generosity can be a blessing for another person, that generosity actually opens our hearts. It blesses us, and it leads us to the most important piece of both gratitude and generosity, which is relationship. Because what gratitude and generosity do for us as human beings is it allows us to open our hearts to other people and even to the earth itself. Not letting those things remain invisible, but instead bringing them to the forefront, allowing us to engage and see them as they are. I wasn't planning this part of the sermon, but I'm going to ad-lib this because it just happened this morning at 8 o'clock as you all were arriving. An invisible character in the midst of our story is the church. Getting ready to have a cup of coffee out in the fellowship hall, a couple people, and up pulls a van out in the parking lot. 2 young women with 2 young children, ages 2 and 3. And they come into the church and they explain that tomorrow is August 1st. Anyone know what August 1st generally means for people in our community? Rent is due. I guarantee you, in churches in our communities all over the place, there are invisible people that are hurting right now, that are in need. People that we may not see or know, but that we are called to be in relationship with, to respond to, and to generously offer ourselves for. As we go forth as a congregation, as Resurrection Lutheran Church, here on 132nd and Halsey, right? Our call for the invisible stories and people that are in need, to tend to the earth, and to offer our lives generously for the sake of God's light and love being known in the world, to bring about health and wellness for all people. But the good news is this: we have a God that supports us in this work, that comes to us through challenging parables and difficult stories to say, I still love you, I care about you, and I will provide for you. Trust in my life. Trust in the life of Jesus and his death and resurrection, and trust that you can follow him in giving your life away for others. Let us live into that good news and that hope as we go forth. May God's peace